I'm Theron Ramacharaka. Excuse me. Get myself positioned properly. Now, it would have been common sense, wouldn't it, for me to have positioned myself properly before I started recording. But then, I've been told I don't have a lot of common sense. That I lack common sense. This video is about common sense. Guess I'm going to go ahead and make a playlist about common sense. Why not, right? It's just, I mean, given the nature of some of my other playlists here, it just seems, to be a matter of common sense that sooner or later, I would develop a playlist about common sense. Does that make sense? I mean, is that something that people of sensibility would come up with, in common, like the majority of people would come up with? How common is what's known as common sense? If it were common, then why do we hear it said so often that most people don't have much common sense? Sometimes I have claimed that I have uncommon sense. Over here in WikiHow, wikihow.com, there's a little article that people contribute to. It looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe a total of 26 or 27 people have contributed to so far, and it's very short. So, look, I really don't think that I'm going to be infringing on anybody's copyright here, because I don't really think there is one, unless it belongs to WikiHow. And if WikiHow thinks it's inappropriate for me to narrate this on YouTube, then I'll take it off. But look, I'm looking at the WikiHow right now. You can edit this article. I have the choice to edit it if I want to. So really, I think this is just kind of like something that can be shared. So I'm going to go ahead and just read it to you, but I'm telling you where it's coming from. I'm giving you the source. wikihow.com / that's with the slash leaning to the right at the top. Develop common sense. wikihow.com develop common sense. Here we go. How to develop common sense. Smart people don't always do things in a smart way. Sometimes smart people can do confoundedly irrational things like gambling away all their money on the stock market or forgetting to take adequate clothing for a backcountry hike in the middle of very changeable weather. Shame, shame, shame. Now, whatever your background, training, intellectual quotient, that is IQ, or experience, common sense. I've recently heard that common sense can't be taught. I had an employer recently who claimed over and over that almost all of his employees lack common sense completely. And that he, although he was perhaps the most, as he put it, I'm just saying what he said, stupid people in his entire graduating class from a high school, has gobs of common sense, which is how he's able to run his business, apparently. But most people who work for him agree that he doesn't run his business with much common sense. I don't know. But he claimed, the immediate point is, he claimed that common sense can't be taught. And therefore, he was constantly scratching his head over what he was going to do about this employee today and that employee tomorrow and some other employee yesterday. I don't know what I'm going to do with you. You don't have any common sense. And you can't teach common sense. I mean, he would tell people this. Now, does that make sense? Is it common sense to talk like that to your employees? I don't know. It says here, while it may seem provocative, suggesting that smart people don't use common sense, this deliberate association is merely to highlight that everyone has lapses in common sense. And it says, whatever your background, training, intellectual quotient, or experience, common sense can be learned. Well, if it can be learned, it can be taught. And it can be applied in everyday situations. And again, suggesting that smart people don't use common sense, that's just to highlight that everyone, including what we might call smart people, have lapses in common sense. The more we are trained to think one way by our family, our workplace, our culture, the greater the chance that sometimes we will allow sloppy or autopilot thinking to take the place of common sense. Common sense isn't a one-stop destination. It's a way of thinking that needs constant nourishing and application. And this article provides just one way of looking at developing your common sense a little further. So, according to this one way of looking at developing your common sense a little further, common sense isn't a static thing. Something you're either born with it or not, and it just, your quantity of common sense kind of remains stable all the way through life. So if you weren't born with much, you're kind of out of luck with respect to common sense. And if you were born with a rather high dose of it, well, good for you, because that's gonna be with you all your life, and nobody can come along and teach you, how to improve on it, and if you don't have it, you're just out of luck. Not only can it be learned, according to this one way of looking at developing your common sense a little further. Well, according to this, it can not only be learned. Obviously, the inference is that it can be taught, and that it needs constant nourishing and application. It's not a one-stop destination. That is, it's not static. It's dynamic. And just saying, this article provides one way of looking at developing your common sense a little further. Well, inherent in that proposition is the very idea that common sense can be developed. So, there are a few easy steps here. Number one, familiarize yourself with the purpose and the meaning of common sense. All right, well, let's get at it then. According to Merriam-Webster, that being the dictionary, common sense is about exercising sound and prudent judgment based on a simple perception of the situation or the facts. Sound and prudent judgment. Now, I'm taking in here that the word sound is not referring in a very, in the strict sense, in the manner that it is used in formal logic, where soundness is an attribute of deductive reasoning. Soundness in deductive reasoning occurs or exists when a deductive argument that is well structured, in other words, is valid, It's not just pretending to be, valid deduction at work, but it's well-structured, well-formed deductive reasoning, a well-formed deductive argument has true premises. In other words, it's starting from things that are true. Well, then your conclusion reached by such reasoning is guaranteed to be true. Just because you have a valid structure in place. And that's called soundness when that happens. I don't think that sound and prudent judgment here, the word sound is referring to, just in that strict sense. But then again, if it's not, I'm not sure exactly what it means. It's not well defined. Or am I overcomplicating it beyond the bounds of common sense here? Well, this definition suggests that common sense depends on not overcomplicating the situation. That's what it says. This definition suggests that common sense depends on not overcomplicating the situation, applying experience and general knowledge to the situation. And implicit in this is self-trust that your considered experience is valid for future situations. Karl Albrecht calls common sense practical intelligence. He defines it as the mental ability to cope with the challenges and opportunities of life. Well, I consider myself to be somebody of practical intelligence with respect to certain things. Some of the material here in my channel is practical instruction of a sort that laid out in a systematic manner. Information of a sort that is a bit obscure. And in a systematic manner then that is not quite often found. And it's practical stuff. It's laid out in a practical fashion. I would think it would take some level of practical intelligence to do that. And anybody who follows through with that systematic method laid down for personal evolution and achievement training here in my YouTube channel might even attain a level of practical intelligence themselves. I mean, it's designed to help people, figure out for themselves how to continue generating such material for themselves in the future, for their whole life. There seems to be a significant amount of practical intelligence taking place there. But, yet, I've been told, in a workplace, one workplace, and I've kind of noticed it in other areas of my life, that regardless of personal evolution and achievement training in my own life, many other forms of education and experience, esoteric and exoteric alike, academic and non-academic alike, I seem to, in certain areas, with certain things, kind of fall a little short of the mental ability to cope with the challenges and opportunities of life. That does happen. It does happen. But not with all areas of life. It's hard to put my finger on it. And this is the case with many people. This is the case with many people. We're not all we're not equally developed across the board in every area of our thinking and life. Some aspects of our way of getting on in the world seem to be ahead of other aspects. Karl Albrecht explains that common sense is situational. and it's dependent on context. And that your common sense is one aspect of your life, and that your common sense in one aspect of your life might be excellent while failing abysmally in another aspect of your life. I was just kind of getting at that, right? As to the purpose of common sense, it is basically thinking that prevents you from making irrational mistakes or decisions. A thinking approach that may open your eyes to the possibility that insisting on being right prevents you from seeing the bigger picture. Now, this suggestion here that common sense is situational, dependent on context, I have sometimes looked for, in areas where I seem to have a little, feel a little challenged in figuring out the situation in the context and figuring out the best way of going about something. Whereas I don't have any problem like that in other areas. And it's kind of hard to figure out exactly what the name of that category is, or what things fit into that set, which is defined as those things that I have a little bit, I have a little less acumen in figuring out with respect to situation and context dependency. And coming up with the best course of action. So I have sometimes looked for general rules, a general rule to apply. So I might find a general rule that applies to that kind of set of things that I think I have been able to identify. And then I don't, maybe if I try to apply the general rule in a next instance, I find that I can't figure out how to apply the general rule. Because the context isn't the same as it was last time that the question came up, and I kind of found this general rule finally in life. Well, now the context is different. Now I don't know how to apply it. So I'd like a general rule for how to figure out how to apply the general rules. Common sense can also serve the purpose of removing you from being hidebound to rules, theories, ideas, and guidelines that would hamper or stifle the best decision in a particular situation. Well, now, this just keeps getting more and more confusing. Does this correspond with common sense at all? I don't know. Let's keep going. In other words, just because something says so, or just because it has always been done that way, is not a reason to abandon common sense about present needs and change the circumstances. Well, it's starting to sound like common sense is something that kicks in, regardless of the situation or the context, and just kind of points you in the right direction without any general guidelines. But you know what? I've noticed a lot of people that seem to have what others would call, others may say, oh, that's a president that has a lot of common sense. He's using his common sense. And we find that he does that a lot. He's not that bright, but he has a lot of common sense. And it seems like if you go talk to that person and you ask them about their decision making, and if you can get past their looking at you like you should already know the answers to these things in life, there, buddy. I mean, they look at you like what you're asking about, how they think. You're asking things that are common sense. What's wrong with you? You must be joking. And they don't really know how to answer you. They don't know how to answer you because they never sat down and really thought about it, perhaps. Well, they might throw out a few general guidelines. And that's about all they have for you. And then we're back to guidelines again. Continuing. Number 2. Understand the ease with which the human mind is convinced that an idea is right, contrary to indicators clearly demonstrating otherwise. Alright. We're human. We're fallible. And our brains work in certain ways as a means of providing shortcuts to ensure survival in a world where being chased by predators could end your life. I haven't been chased by any predators lately, but no, that reminds me of something true, what I take to be true about, not common sense, but, or this other thing being talked about here, but of cumulative stress. Cumulative stress. There's a parallel here with what this just said about our brains work in certain ways as a means of providing shortcuts to ensure survival in a world where being chased by predators could end your life. This is kind of suggesting that our brains work in a way that has not evolved very much for a long time. Our brains. I guess that's a reference to, like our biological organism, our central nervous system. And they're not, a materialist thinking that, all we have to our entire mental atmosphere is a brain. Well, well, I guess that's not even really relevant here. When they said brains, let's just think brain. Like we're operating a brain. Like it overrides and controls all mental functioning. Matter over matter. Hasn't evolved since the days when being chased around by predators could end our life, and it happens, every other, like once or twice a week, at least. Cumulative stress. Now, cumulative stress, see, here's a parallel. Cumulative stress is something that happens kind of like that. You see, we don't have predators chasing us around. Usually, these days, we don't have situations that could end our lives every day. I mean, we could get into a plane crash, we could get into a car crash, but look, these are not immediate threats. Being in a car crash, yeah. Or having someone darn near run us off the road, yeah. But are we constantly, all day long, every day, having to look over our shoulder for someone shooting at us? I mean, are we, if you're in a war, and you're a soldier or a sailor or, an airman, in a war, on the front lines, okay, yeah. If we're running through the jungle amid man-eating tigers, yeah. But we don't have, our everyday lives are not like that. And yet, our central nervous system responds frequently throughout the day as if there was a threat to our life. I mean, like a mortal threat taking place. It responds that way. We may know intellectually in our brain that there's no immediate threat, like a car horn blasting behind us, and we didn't know there was a car there. Like suddenly, and we jump, right? We have this response, this autonomic response. That always, in these circumstances, always, it's very quick. It's a very quick response. And the thing it does with hormones and with muscle movements, it's a very predictable pattern, and it slowed it down and looked at it in very slow-mo. You can see a sequence of events happening. And if that sequence were carried out to its extreme, our physical body, physical body, would be in a fetal position. That initial jump like that is something, a loud noise behind you, like that. If you slow that jerk down, like, when you jump, okay? Slow it down and look at it. It's a progression that is shared. It's common among people. And if taken further, if it didn't stop, it would result in being in a complete fetal position. Or running the hell out of there. But usually it's right toward the fetal position before anything. It's going right that way. And recovering from that, or getting angry over something like it was life-threatening when it was not really a big deal. But getting really pissed off, going off, flying off the handle. Any of these things that are what we may call responses to stressors that are overdone responses. But they're autonomic. They have a large autonomic or automatic aspect to them. Okay, especially that jumping thing, like we're about to get struck on the head, or something's about to cut our head off, or something's about to leap on us, when in fact maybe it was just a car driving by and it blew its horn on somebody else. There was no threat to our life whatsoever. Okay. Society has evolved to the point where we're not being chased around by predators. Unless, of course, we happen to have a predator chasing us around. But our autonomic nervous system still reacts as though that were the case. In other words, biologically, with respect to this, we have not evolved nearly as rapidly as has our society. We're safer than what our autonomic responses would indicate. Now, here's the thing with cumulative stress. It takes a while to recover from those responses. It takes a while. It can actually take up to several days to fully recover from some of these responses, especially when anger is involved. It can take at least an hour to settle down from a fear response that was really unjustified. An autonomic reaction to something. It was not really a life threat at all. And these little things happen a lot. These little things are just everyday events that can occur like all day long. Just normal life, we would call it. And here we are having these dramatic reactions to them. Now, recovery can take hours, even days, right? And we have recovery of a reaction from a reaction that's not necessary. But we have a lot of instances occurring in which this reaction is happening. above and beyond our awareness. So what we end up with is accumulating stress because we don't have enough recovery time from reactions that aren't even really necessary, for the large part. When those reactions were actually necessary, let's say, according to the traditionally taught, course of human history, I'm sure there was a time in history, more than once, when, these kinds of biological responses were really important for survival every day. But were these events happening every hour, every half hour, like in the workplace, or like when driving? Somebody gets a little too close. No, it wasn't a threat to our life, but it's like you have to watch what you're doing. You have this reaction, like get out of the way. This stuff builds up. There's not enough recovery time between instances of it, and that's the cause of cumulative stress. All right, well, that's what this sounded a little bit like here. We're talking about our brains work in certain ways as a means of providing shortcuts to ensure survival in a world where being chased by predators could end your life. So apparently, cumulative stress and something having to do with common sense are related somehow. Relate to, responses of being chased by predators. In a modern world where caves and saber-toothed tigers are no longer a constant companion, some of that reactive, split-second judging can land us in hot water as we react instead of reflecting, assume instead of teasing apart the realities, and follow habit instead of challenging its continued utility. So apparently common sense is something that, what I get from this so far, okay? Common sense is not a part of this split-second judging that can land us in hot water. Apparently what's, in the same way that, like we might call, this cumulative stress thing another form of getting ourselves in hot water through life. With respect to our health, so maybe there's a connection, among lowering cumulative stress and learning to apply common sense. How about that?